Welcome, curious minds, to the deep dive. Have you ever just stopped and thought, that our lives, maybe everything from our daily rhythms to those really weird moments that stretch our understanding, might be constantly influenced by forces we don't even consciously notice?
Like things we just take for granted.
Exactly, like the moon's pull. We know about the tides, sure, but what if it's pulling on us?
Uh-huh.
Or think about cosmic radiation, these faint whispers from distant stars. Could they be shaping us in ways we're only just starting to figure out?
It's a big thought. This idea that maybe the supernatural isn't really supernatural at all.
Right. What if it's just nature we haven't quite grasped yet? A hidden layer of reality that's been there the whole time.
That's a fascinating premise.
Well, today that's exactly what we're diving into. We're taking a really deep look at Lyall Watson's remarkable work, Supernature, the natural history of the supernatural. And let me tell you, this book, it's more than just a book. It really challenges how we normally think about reality, pushes us to look beyond the surface.
And Watson himself is, well, quite the figure to be guiding this exploration, isn't he? His background is just staggering.
Oh, absolutely. A true polymath. He was an anthropologist, exploring cultures in Jordan, Nigeria, Indonesia, Brazil, just all over.
And dug into archaeology too, right?
Right.
Israel, Turkey, Peru.
Yep. And paleontology in Africa, marine biology in the Indian Ocean, botany in deserts. I mean, the list just goes on. He even did medical research in the Philippines and represented the Seychelles on the International Whaling Commission.
Wow. So definitely not just an academic sitting in an office.
Not at all. This is someone who spent years actively pursuing the paranormal, but with a really scientific, open, yet critical eye. He was uniquely positioned for this stuff.
And that's what makes his approach so compelling. That diverse, hands-on experience.
Yeah.
It let him look at these seemingly inexplicable things not as some, mystic, but as a naturalist focused on observation, on evidence.
Exactly. So our mission for you in this deep dive is to explore how our world and even ourselves are deeply connected to these subtle cosmic rhythms, these hidden forces.
We're hoping to uncover some really surprising nuggets of knowledge, things that might make you rethink what's natural and what we've maybe too quickly labeled supernatural. It's about finding the patterns, the connections, not just dismissing what we don't understand yet.
Absolutely. So get ready to have your perception stretched, maybe even a little bit.
Yeah.
Wonderfully confused. Okay, so let's unpack this fascinating idea. Watson kicks things off by suggesting that even in what he calls the bedlam of noisy confusion of the cosmos, there's actually a hidden pattern, an intricate pattern of information that life itself is designed to pick up on, to respond to. He even suggests life was made by this pattern.
It's a huge concept.
Yeah.
And what's really striking is how he connects this grand cosmic idea to the most basic familiar cycles right here on Earth.
Right. He argues that these cosmic forces happen in cycles, and life here has evolved to respond. Makes sense.
And the strongest biological responses, he points out, are linked to the shortest, most frequent cycles, the ones that cause the most changes in a given time. And the most fundamental of those, our own planet spinning on its axis.
Our day. But it turns out Earth isn't quite the perfect sphere we might picture.
Not at all. It's a distorted sphere, he says, a bit flattened at the poles, even slightly pear-shaped, bulging a bit in the southern hemisphere.
And these little irregularities, they actually affect its spin and orbit.
In subtle ways, yes. And that leads to something really interesting. We don't just have one kind of day.
Right, I remember this bit. There's more than just our 24-hour clock day.
Exactly. We use the mean solar day, the average for our clocks, 24.0 hours. But life, Watson suggests, seems sensitive to 3 different daily cycles.
Okay, what are they?
You've got the solar day, 24.0 hours, based on the sun. Then the lunar day, 24.8 hours, based on the moon. And the sidereal day, 23.9 hours, which is Earth's rotation relative to distant stars.
Huh. And we just picked the solar one for convenience.
Pretty much. But the other rhythms are still there, ticking away, subtly influencing biology. Life seems aware of all of them.
And the biggest daily cosmic event, the sun disappearing, sunset. We take it for granted.
Watson calls it a traumatic change. He gives these vivid examples from watching total eclipses.
Oh yeah, like what?
Well, he saw an eagle just drop out of the sky into a tree, and a troop of baboons suddenly rushed into a defensive formation like they would for a predator. Total confusion.
Wow, because the sun just vanished unexpectedly.
Exactly. Only humans predict eclipses, he notes. But all life is profoundly tuned to the daily obliteration of sunlight. It's a deep primal response.
That sensitivity.
Yeah.
It even extends to temperature, right? Using temperature changes like a clock.
Yes, thermoperiodism, how
Hmm.
organisms use rhythmic temperature changes. There was a great experiment by Hans Kalmus with grasshopper eggs.
What did you find?
If he kept the eggs at a steady 22 degrees Celsius, they hatched at dawn, every single day, like clockwork.
Okay.
But if you drop the temperature to 11 degrees Celsius, they only hatched at sunrise every third day.
Whoa. So the temperature cycle was setting their hatching rhythm.
Precisely. It shows how fundamental this is. Even simple life forms are tuning into Earth's temperature changes as vital information, setting their internal clocks by it.
And it's not just grasshoppers, is it? Mammals, too.
Absolutely. Mice, for example, they have a temperature peak around midnight when they're most active, and they're coolest at midday when resting. It's a clear 24-hour cycle, even if you keep their environment at a constant temperature.
So it's an internal rhythm.
Exactly. And some parasites have even adapted to this, setting their clocks by their host's body temperature cycles. It's deeply embedded.
There was something about plants, too, wasn't there? Tomato plants.
Yes, the American botanist.
Yeah.
He found that tomato plant leaves would suffer and die if kept under constant light and heat.
Okay, that makes sense. Maybe too much stress.
But they stayed perfectly healthy if they had a regular 24-hour cycle of temperature change. Any regular fluctuation between 10 and 30 degrees Celsius worked. It didn't even matter if it went up or down at a certain time, just that it changed regularly.
So the rhythm itself was crucial for survival.
It seems so. It really highlights how finely tuned life is to these subtle, daily environmental shifts.
Okay, so the Earth's spin, daily light, temperature cycles, incredibly influential. But what about the moon? This is where Watson really goes beyond the obvious, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. He argues the moon's influence goes way beyond just ocean tides. It seems to impact weather, maybe even our own physiology in ways we barely recognize.
And the classic example he uses is the oysters.
Frank Brown's famous oyster experiment from 1954.
Yes.
He took oysters from Long Island Sound, where they naturally open and close with the tides,
Right.
and moved them 1,000 miles inland to Evanston, Illinois. No ocean anywhere near.
Okay, what happened?
For 2 weeks, incredibly, they kept their exact Long Island Sound tidal rhythm,
Yeah.
opening and closing as if they were still by the sea.
That's already pretty weird.
It gets weirder. On the 15th day, they shifted. The rhythm changed.
Shifted to what? Local time?
Not exactly. Brown did the calculations. They had shifted their rhythm to the precise time the high tide would have flooded Evanston, Illinois, if it had been on the coast.
Get out. They tune into an imaginary tide.
It seems like it. It's powerful evidence of this deep, almost unbelievable environmental sensitivity, responding to something completely imperceptible to us.
That is mind-boggling. An imaginary tide. And this lunar influence, it might even explain some old folklore, right? Like predicting rain.
Absolutely. He mentions the Luo people in Africa near Lake Victoria. They have a saying, when mayflies swarm, it's going to rain. Turns out they might have been onto something scientifically real.
How so?
Well, we now know the moon pulls on Earth's atmosphere, creating subtle air tides. These change the barometric pressure, the depth of air above us, constantly.
Okay, atmospheric tides.
And certain spots on Earth experience unusually high and low pressures due to these tides, acting like factories, Watson says, churning out cyclones and anticyclones, directly influencing weather.
So the moon stirring up the atmosphere affects weather patterns.
Exactly. And while we track these disturbances with satellites now, we've only recently started seriously considering the moon's role in producing these subtle, widespread weather patterns.
Is there data to back this up?
Yeah, Australian rainfall data, 50 weather stations, 25 years of data. It confirmed the same lunar influence pattern seen up in the northern hemisphere, so the effect seems global.
Okay, so the moon affects weather, but how does it actually make rain? What's the mechanism?
Good question. Rain needs particles in the clouds, dust, salt, ice for water vapor to condense around. You need those little nuclei.
Right.
A major natural source of these particles is meteor dust. About 1,000 tons of it falls on Earth every single day.
1,000 tons. Wow.
And here's the kicker. 2 independent teams recently found that the rate meteor dust arrives at the edge of our atmosphere is significantly higher around the full and new moon.
No way. So more cosmic dust falls when the moon is full or new.
Seems so. And that could be the direct link. The moon's phase influences meteor dust influx, which provides the seeds for rain formation, a cosmic cycle affecting something as basic as rainfall.
It's also intricately connected. Frank Brown, the oyster guy, he spent decades trying to isolate things from these influences, didn't he?
He did. 25 years, trying to shield seaweed, carrots, potatoes, worms, salamanders, everything. dark rooms, constant temperature, even equalizing barometric pressure.
And did it work? Could he isolate them?
He kept failing, as he put it. He always put constant conditions in quotation marks because despite his instruments showing stability, the organisms still showed rhythmic responses. They were still picking up on something external.
So his failures actually proved the point. Life is just incredibly sensitive.
Exactly. It completely challenged the old biological thinking. It paints a picture of a constant, subtle dialogue between life and the wider environment, even things we can't easily measure.
So what other subtle factors could they have been responding to if it wasn't pressure or temperature?
Well, a very strong candidate, one Brown gathered more evidence for, is magnetism. Earth's magnetic field isn't static. It changes subtly, hour by hour.
Okay.
And these changes are directly linked to the positions of the moon and the sun. Data from Greenwich, going back decades, clearly shows the field shifting in line with the solar day, the lunar day, and even the lunar month.
So the moon and sun are subtly tweaking Earth's magnetic field all the time.
Constantly. And if we connect that back to Brown's experiments, it strongly suggests that life can perceive these tiny magnetic shifts, even in supposed isolation. Magnetism might be the missing link mediating those lunar effects he couldn't screen out, like life has an internal magnetic sense.
Wow. And the human connection to these lunar cycles, Watson goes into some really astonishing stuff there, particularly around conception.
Yes, the work of Eugen Jonas, the Czech psychiatrist,
Yeah.
who's fascinated by lunar rhythms, and it led him to a truly remarkable claim about female fertility.
What was it?
He found that a woman's peak ability to conceive seems to coincide precisely with the phase of the moon that was occurring when she herself was born.
Seriously, the moon phase at your birth dictates your fertility cycle.
According to Jonas's findings, yes.
Yeah.
He developed charts based on these lunar affinities. And when used as a natural birth control method, tracking this specific lunar phase each month, it proved to be an incredible 98% effective.
98%. That's comparable to hormonal birth control.
Exactly, but potentially with no side effects. And it gets even more extraordinary.
How?
His method also claimed to predict the child's sex with 95–98% accuracy, depending on whether conception occurred when the moon was in a male or female zodiac sign, according to astrological tradition.
Okay, that sounds really out there. Is there any verification?
Well, Watson reports that at a clinic in Bratislava, Jonas made calculations for 8,000 women who specifically wanted boys, and 95% were successful. And apparently, when tested by gynecologists who only gave him the time of intercourse, he predicted the sex of the resulting child with 98% accuracy. It's an extraordinary claim, definitely pushing boundaries, but Watson presents the data as compelling evidence of some deep, unseen lunar link to human biology.
Wow. Okay. And beyond conception, there are behavioral links, too.
Seems so. The American Institute of Medical Climatology found that crimes with a strong psychotic element, things like arson, kleptomania, destructive driving, homicidal alcoholism, show definite peaks around the full moon.
The classic full moon madness idea.
But with statistical backing. And interestingly, this holds true even on cloudy nights. So it doesn't seem to be about the moonlight itself.
Suggesting some other unseen lunar influence.
Exactly. And neurologist Leonard Ravitz might have found a physiological basis for this. He's been years measuring tiny electrical potential differences between people's heads and chests.
Okay, like an internal voltage.
Sort of. He found everyone shows a daily cycle in these readings. But the greatest differences, the biggest electrical shifts, consistently occurred around the full moon. And this effect was especially pronounced in mental patients.
Ah. So the body's electrical state changes with the lunar cycle.
Ravitz suggested exactly that. As the moon subtly modifies Earth's magnetic field, these changes might precipitate crises in people whose mental balance is already, precarious. His conclusion was stark. Whatever else we may be, we are all electric machines. He thought these universal factors mobilize our energy reserves, potentially aggravating existing issues.
So it's not just folklore. There seems to be a measurable physiological connection. And Watson mentions other correlations, too.
Yeah, claims about tuberculosis deaths peaking 7 days before the full moon, possibly linked to blood pH cycles, and a German physician reporting correlations between lunar phases and things like pneumonia, uric acid levels, even the time of death. It all points towards this pervasive, often hidden link between our inner workings and these grand cosmic rhythms.
Okay, from the moon, let's shift to the big one. The sun. Obviously light and heat, but Watson argues it's bombarding us with powerful forces that affect life, maybe indirectly, maybe even directly.
Absolutely. The sun is just this incredible effervescent mass, Every second, it destroys 4 million tons of hydrogen in massive explosions, sending out the solar wind electrons and protons that constantly buffets Earth. We're living right inside the sun's extended atmosphere, basically experiencing its weather.
And part of that weather is sunspots.
Right. Earth-sized areas of intense activity. They flare up, causing magnetic storms in our own atmosphere.
And these solar storms, they have effects down here.
Indirectly, yes.
Mhm.
There are documented correlations, like flower blooming times, earlier blooms in quiet sunspot years, later blooms in active years. Even the number of earthquakes in Chile over the last century seems to follow the 11-year sunspot cycle.
So solar activity influences earthly events.
It suggests a worldwide uniformity of change, Watson says, largely driven by these solar magnetic storms, may be influencing climate patterns that then affect biology and geology.
Okay, that's the indirect influence, but you said maybe a direct connection. How would that even work?
This is where Watson proposes something really radical.
Hmm.
He suggests the key might be water.
Hmm.
That cosmic activity could directly control living things through the water within them.
Water. How? It seems so basic.
Well, water, H2O, is actually incredibly weird. It has unique properties. It's denser as a liquid than a solid. That's why ice floats, which is crucial for life in winter.
Right. Otherwise, lakes would freeze solid.
Exactly. And it's most dense at 4 degrees Celsius, a few degrees above freezing. Chemically, it can act as both an acid and a base. It's peculiar stuff.
What makes it behave like that?
It's the hydrogen bonds between the molecules. They're relatively weak, constantly breaking and reforming. This makes liquid water this incredibly dynamic, intricately laced, almost continuous structure.
Yeah.
One scientist even described a glass of water as like a single giant molecule because of this interconnectedness.
Okay, so water is uniquely structured and dynamic. How does that connect to cosmic forces?
This brings us to Giorgio Picardi, an Italian scientist. He did this massive experiment, over 200,000 observations on a simple chemical reaction. Bismuth oxychloride precipitating in distilled water.
What did he find?
He found consistent daily and seasonal variations in how fast the reaction happened, even when he tried to keep conditions perfectly stable.
So something external was influencing the water chemistry.
That's what it looked like.
Yeah.
And the most amazing part, when he shielded the experiment with just a thin sheet of copper, the variations stopped. The results normalized.
A thin copy sheet blocked the effect. What could it be?
Something subtle, some kind of external force or radiation. Picardi concluded that water is sensitive to extremely delicate influences and can adapt like no other liquid. And then he made this leap.
Yeah.
He hypothesized, perhaps it is even by means of water and the aqueous system that the external forces are able to react on living organisms.
Wow. So water isn't just the stuff of life, it's maybe the antenna for life, tuning into cosmic signals.
That's the incredible implication. It turns our bodies, which are mostly water, into living receivers of cosmic information. And interestingly, water is most unstable and perhaps most biologically useful, right around 35–40 degrees Celsius.
Body temperature.
Exactly. Prime temperature for life and prime temperature for water's sensitivity to external influences.
Okay, this is getting really expansive beyond our solar system now. Cosmic rays, gravity.
Right. The universe is filled with energy, radiation from distant stars, supernovae releasing enormous quantities of cosmic energy. Life on Earth evolved bathing in this stuff.
And gravity. Watson calls it the most basic cosmic force of all.
Immense. The gravitational energy from the center of our galaxy alone is said to be 10,000 times greater than the electromagnetic energy. It's hard to measure its effects directly, but there's some intriguing evidence.
Like what?
Watson cites what he calls the best evidence so far. An experiment with cockchafer beetles. Yeah. A Swiss biologist put swarms of them in an opaque container, and they reacted when an 80-pound lump of lead was moved silently closer to the outside of the container.
They reacted to a lump of lead they couldn't see. How?
It's hard to explain conventionally, unless they were somehow aware of its gravitational influence or some other incredibly subtle force emanating from it.
That's deeply weird. What about other cosmic waves?
Very low-frequency waves, VLF waves. These have incredibly long wavelengths, millions of miles, and originate outside our solar system. Their energy is almost too weak to measure.
Okay. So probably no effect on us.
You'd think so. But a German study involving 53,000 people found they consistently took longer to react to simple stimuli when these VLF waves were present.
They slowed down people's reaction times, even though the waves are almost undetectable.
Narrowly. And here's the truly fascinating part. The pattern of these VLF waves. It's almost indistinguishable, Watson says, from the patterns recorded by an EEG in the human brain during certain states.
Wait, the waves from deep space mimic our brain waves?
Some of them, yes. It hints at this profound, maybe fundamental resonance between our consciousness and the cosmos itself.
That's mind-blowing. And then there's Kozyrev, the Russian astrophysicist. He had some even stranger ideas, right, about time?
Oh, Kozyrev is fascinating. Respected scientist, he predicted gas emissions on the moon years before they were found. He built these complex devices, gyroscopes and pendulums, trying to measure what he thought might be time itself as a physical flow.
Measuring time. How?
In one experiment, he stretched an elastic band. He called the fixed end the effect and the moving part the cause. His instruments consistently showed that some measurable property was greater at the effect end than the cause end, even when shielded by thick walls.
What did he think it meant?
He believed time is thin around the cause and dense around the effect, as if the process of cause and effect itself was altering the flow or density of time, maybe consuming or generating energy from it.
That's a radical idea. Did he connect it to life?
Yes. He noted life's inherent asymmetry. Most biological molecules are left-handed. He found left-handed molecules, like turpentine, produce stronger responses on his equipment near that stretched elastic than right-handed ones, like sugar. He came to believe our planet actually adds energy to the galaxy through these life processes.
Adds energy to the galaxy.
That was his controversial idea. He compared the way double stars seem to mysteriously become alike over vast distances to telepathic contact between people.
Right.
He'd suggested that all processes in the universe feed this general current of time, which in turn influences matter. It's incredibly speculative, but
It paints a picture of a universe that's deeply interconnected, with life playing an active role, maybe even influencing time itself.
exactly. If we connect all this, Kozyrev, VLF waves, Picardy's water, it seems the universe is this symphony of subtle frequencies and forces, and life is constantly resonating with it. So the next big question is, what does this mean for our own bodies, our minds? How do we interact with this hidden reality?
Okay, let's definitely unpack that. Because if this is all true, Watson's suggesting our influence doesn't just stop at our skin, that we produce subtle forces, maybe even control them. This leads us into some really extraordinary territory, like life fields and psychokinesis, PK.
Right. The life field concept owes a lot to H.S. Burr, a neuroanatomist at Yale, starting back in the 1930s. His basic idea was that all living things have an electromagnetic field around them.
An aura.
Sort of, but Burr framed it scientifically. He saw it as an organizing matrix, guiding development and processes. He was clear, though. He didn't think it was the secret of life itself or proof of survival after death. For him, it was a means to an end, a way to understand these supernature phenomena.
Did he have evidence for this field?
He did. A really neat experiment with a salamander. He floated it in salt water, rotated the dish, and measured the water with electrodes. He picked up a clear alternating current, matching the rotation.
Okay.
But when he rotated the dish without the salamander, there was no current. It proved the amphibian itself was generating a subtle electrical field.
Wow. And he thought this field could be affected by disease.
Exactly. He took his equipment to Bellevue Hospital in New York, tested over 1,000 women with an obstetrician. In 102 cases, they found abnormal gradients, unusual electrical patterns between the abdomen and cervix.
And what did that mean?
Astonishingly, in later surgeries for unrelated issues, 95 of those 102 women were found to have malignant cancer of the cervix or uterus, often before any physical symptoms had shown up.
So the field changed before the disease was detectable otherwise.
It strongly suggests that. It could be an incredibly valuable early warning system, picking up illness at an energetic level first. He even thought the electrical gradient was linked to the speed of healing.
That's amazing. Did he do other experiments with the field?
Yes, another cool one involved corn seeds. He could successfully sort pure breeding seeds from hybrid ones, seeds that look identical just by measuring their different electrical potentials with a voltmeter.
So the field reflected genetic differences.
It seemed to. Watson draws an analogy here, comparing it to astrology. Measuring the electrical potential is like identifying a rising sign. It indicates a pattern, but isn't the sole determining factor itself. The life field is a key, not the whole answer, but vital for understanding supernature.
Okay, so if we have these fields, can our minds interact with matter directly? Psychokinesis, PK.
That's the next step. PK is the idea of the mind influencing physical objects or processes without physical contact. J.B. Ryan at Duke University really pioneered the scientific study of this.
How did he study something like moving objects with your mind.
Mostly through statistics. He used things like dice-throwing experiments. Subjects would try to mentally influence the dice. Over huge numbers of trials, they consistently scored slightly, but significantly, above chance. Like getting 16.5 hits out of 36 when chance is 15.
A small effect, but consistent over millions of throws.
Exactly. Rhine used rigorous statistics and set high standards odds of less than 1 in 100 against chance before he'd consider it significant.
And the theory is that this works at a subatomic level.
That's one idea. Since particles at that level are more like waves or areas of electromagnetic action, perhaps the mind generates its own field that can interact with them. PK starts to look like an electric field phenomenon.
Is there evidence for that specific electrical connection?
There's an interesting experiment by W.E. Cox, a mechanical engineer. He built a clock driven by electric current passing through a salt solution. He figured PK could influence the ions moving in the solution, changing the clock's speed.
And did it?
It did,
Huh.
with odds of 1,000 to 1 against chance. It suggests PK can exert an electrical force on particles, both atomic and subatomic.
But you mentioned a drawback.
Yeah, the tricky part is, there are also reports of PK affecting things that aren't electrically conductive, like plastic or wood. So a purely electrical explanation might not cover everything. There could be more going on.
This leads to some even stranger stuff, right? Like that Russian detector.
The Sergeyev detector, described as a new and vitally important instrument. It supposedly measures big changes in a person's electrostatic and magnetic field.
And they used it with someone who could do PK.
Yes, Nelia Mikhailova, a famous Soviet psychic. When she was demonstrating PK moving small objects without touching them, this detector registered her electrostatic field pulsing at 4 cycles per second.
4 cycles per second. Does that match anything?
Perfectly. It matched her pulse rate and strong theta brainwaves, the kind associated with deep relaxation, meditation, almost trance-like states.
So her body's fields were pulsing in sync with her brain state during PK. What did Sergeyev think was happening?
He claimed these field vibrations acted like magnetic waves, causing objects, even non-magnetic ones, to behave as if they were magnetized, being attracted or repelled by her.
That's quite a claim. And PK seems more common in children.
Or people with essentially childlike personalities, Watson notes, often appearing as casual, almost accidental effects. He connects this to things like Ted Sirius's photography.
Putting images on film just by thinking?
Right. And also eidetic imagery, that amazing ability some kids have to retain vivid photographic mental images, which often fades as they go through formal education and learn more abstract thinking.
So is it like an innate ability we somehow suppress or train out of ourselves as adults? Losing that direct imaginative connection?
That's the provocative question, isn't it? It even connects maybe to the idea of luck. Casinos know some people just consistently win more often than chance allows.
The lucky streak.
Yeah. And gambling magazines even advise cultivating a certain attitude, confident, relaxed, almost playful, to try and tip the odds in your favor. Maybe luck really is partly a state of mind, aligning yourself with these subtle influences, perhaps even a touch of unconscious PK.
Mind over matter, or maybe mind tuning into matter. Okay, what about the aura, that luminous field people claim to see around others?
Right, the human aura or bioplasma. There have long been claims of people being super sensitive and able to see it. Walter Kilner, a British physician, suggested specific viewing conditions: dim light, half-closed eyes, light hitting the corner of the eye.
Why those specific conditions?
Well, those conditions actually bypass the main color-seeing cone cells in the retina and stimulate the more sensitive rod cells, the ones we use for night vision. Many animals with good night vision are also sensitive to infrared radiation from prey. So Kilner might have been describing conditions for accessing a natural, albeit rare, human sensitivity to subtle light or energy outside the normal visible spectrum.
Interesting. And Oscar Bagnall tried to describe it physically?
Yes, a Cambridge biologist. He even made special goggles filled with dicyanine dye, trying to sensitize the eyes. He reported the aura wasn't affected by air currents, but was attracted to a magnet. He said it extended furthest from pointy bits like fingers in the nose, like an electrical field.
How did he describe its appearance?
As a hazy outer layer and a brighter inner layer, sometimes with striations or even rays of light shooting out.
Sounds very energetic. How does this compare to Kirlian photography?
Well, listen to this description from a Soviet academic about Kirlian images. Whole luminous labyrinths, flashing, twinkling, flaring, sparks, fantastic galaxies of ghostly light, bright multicolored flares and dim clouds. It sounds incredibly similar, doesn't it? Almost like Bagnall's visual description, but captured on film.
So what is Kirlian photography?
It was discovered by Semyon Kirlian, a Soviet electrician, back in 1939. He found he could capture these glowing images of, say, a fingertip or a leaf by placing the object between a high-frequency electrical spark generator and a photographic plate. No camera needed.
Just the object, the electricity, and the film.
Basically, yes. And crucially, inert objects like a coin produce no image. Only living things seem to create this discharge pattern. Kirlian built machines, got Soviet patents, even made viewers to watch this pyrotechnic display live. It looked like they were capturing the object's energy field directly.
And this connects to acupuncture.
Apparently so. The Kirlians and another scientist named Gakin developed a device called the Tibiscope based on this technology. It could electronically locate and mark acupuncture points on the skin with incredible accuracy down to 0.1 millimeters.
Wow. So it provides physical evidence for acupuncture points.
That's the claim. Hard, practical proof, Watson suggests, for the effectiveness of acupuncture and the reality of this plasma or energy field it seems to interact with. It implies these ancient healing methods were tapping into a real, measurable, energetic system.
This leads to a fascinating idea. If this biological plasma body or life field exists, maybe it actually organizes the physical body.
That's the implication. And there are some biological phenomena that are hard to explain otherwise. Think about regeneration. If you mince up a mouse muscle and repack it in the wound, it can regenerate, completely, perfectly organized.
Sponges.
Right. Shred a sponge into individual cells, and they can somehow find each other and reassemble into a whole new sponge. How do they know how to do that?
And plants without nervous systems showing coordinated action.
Exactly. The Mimosa pudica, the sensitive plant, folding its leaves instantly from a touch. Or a Venus flytrap snapping shut. We know the biochemistry of the cell contractions, but how do all the separate cells coordinate without a central command system?
It points to some kind of organizing field.
It really does. Watson concludes, what do we call it, bioplasma or a life field? It's getting hard to deny that our sphere of influence, our organizational blueprint, might extend beyond our physical skin. Our very form and function could be guided by this unseen field.
Okay, another ability often seen as supernatural is dowsing, finding water or minerals with a stick. How does Watson approach this?
He discusses how in Russia they reframed it as the biophysical effects method, looking for a physiological basis rather than dismissing it.
Did they find anything?
A Red Army commission in the 1960s did thousands of tests. Geologists worked alongside dowsers. They reported that forked twigs did respond with measurable physical force, sometimes quite strongly over underground water and even electrical cables.
So the stick actually moved on its own.
With significant force, they claimed. Interestingly, shielding the area with steel plates or lead didn't stop it, which argues against it being simple electromagnetic detection.
That's strange. What else did they notice?
The twigs seemed to lose their sensitivity after a few days of use and couldn't be repaired, like they were somehow fatigued, suggesting a biological or energetic component in the twig itself, or maybe the interaction.
And it wasn't just water.
No, they reported detecting metal deposits, lead, zinc, even gold at depths of 240 feet. The commission concluded it could be surprisingly successful for locating various underground features.
There was an extradition using dowsing from the air.
Yes, Nikolai Sokchevanov, a Leningrad mineralogist. His team did an aerial survey in 1966. They found something interesting. The rods reacted most strongly not just to water, but to water and friction with soil, like along riverbanks, not necessarily large bodies of moving water.
So detecting an interaction, not just a substance.
It seemed like it. They also precisely located a thin lead seam almost 500 feet down. And so Chevanov even tried to automate it, designing a steel U-shaped instrument with roller bearings, claiming the number of turns indicated depth and size.
Automated dowsing. And they used it for earthquake prediction.
Reportedly, yes. Near Alma-Ata, they surveyed an area just before and right after a large underground explosion. The dowsing rods showed enormous changes in the underground patterns immediately after the blast. These patterns continued to shift for hours before settling.
Did the final pattern match the known geology?
The differences between the before and after patterns, once things settled, corresponded precisely to underground fractures caused by the explosion, which were later confirmed by digging. It suggests the dowsing method was sensitive to the Earth's structural integrity.
Okay, that's geology. What about dowsing for people? Finding missing persons?
Watson mentions this too. The literature is full of accounts, often using pendulums tuned with a personal item belonging to the person being sought. There have been many well-publicized successes, sometimes even working over maps.
Dowsing over a map, how could that possibly work?
It is mind-boggling, as Watson says. The idea that a 2D representation on paper could have some energetic link or property similar to the real person or object.
Hmm.
It defies easy explanation. Maybe shape itself creates a frequency, or it involves some kind of resonance we don't understand. It works often enough in practice that people keep doing it, even if the mechanism is a mystery.
This seems to bring us to a central theme in Watson's work: resonance.
Absolutely. He proposes resonance as the unifying principle behind many of these seemingly supernatural abilities. Responding to the unseen moon, detecting invisible ions, sensing tiny magnetic shifts. It could all be down to sympathetic vibration.
Like the tuning fork example.
Exactly. You strike one tuning fork, say middle C, 256 cycles per second, and another identical fork nearby will start humming softly on its own. Energy is transferred purely through vibrational harmony without physical contact.
So life could be like that second tuning fork.
That's the idea. Watson puts it beautifully. An insect without ears would not be able to hear the sound of the first fork. But if it were sitting on the second one, it would very soon become aware of the vibration and thus of events taking place beyond its normal sphere. That, he says, is what Supernature is all about. Detecting information through resonance, beyond our usual senses.
And he applies this resonance idea to pyramid power.
He does. He recounts the story of Bovis, the Frenchman who built a scale model of the Cheops pyramid and found a dead cat inside it had mummified, dehydrated rapidly.
Okay.
Then Karol Joybal, a radio engineer in Prague, replicated this. He concluded there's a relation between the shape of the space inside the pyramid and the physical, chemical, and biological processes happening within it.
The shape itself creates an effect.
That was the conclusion. And then Joybal remembered an old superstition about razor blades going blunt if left in moonlight. He tried putting a blunt blade under his model pyramid, and it sharpened itself.
It sharpened the blade. Seriously. Seriously enough, that he got Czechoslovakian patent number 91304 in 1959 for the Cheops pyramid razor blade sharpener.
How on earth could that work?
Well, a razor's edge has a crystal structure. Crystals grow by self-replication. When a blade gets blunt, crystals are rubbed off. Theoretically, they could regrow. Maybe moonlight, being polarized, disrupts this, while the pyramid shape does the opposite. Watson wonders if the pyramid acts like a lens focusing cosmic energy, or a resonator promoting crystal growth, or maybe builds a subtle magnetic field that helps atoms realign.
Did Watson try it himself?
He did. He claims he got 4 months of daily use out of single Wilkinson sword blades stored under a pyramid. He also did his own experiments preserving eggs, steak, and dead mice in a cardboard pyramid versus a control shoebox. He said the results forced him to conclude the replica does have special properties. It's hard to dismiss when someone scientific has that personal experience.
From pyramids to sound, resonance applies there too. Definitely. Watson quotes, "In the beginning was the sound of the word." Speech sounds have physical properties. Vowels carry much more power than consonants and travel further. Our ear fluid resonates, making certain vowel sounds like ah and ooh easiest to hear.
And sound can have powerful physical effects.
We all know the stories: the walls of Jericho falling to a shout, a samurai's cry unnerving an opponent, a singer shattering glass. If our bodies resonate with moonlight through water, Watson argues, it's perfectly reasonable to think living matter is also sensitive to the subtle frequencies and patterns in human speech. Maybe certain sounds literally vibrate within us, affecting us physically and emotionally.
This connects to Kammerer's law of seriality, the idea of meaningful coincidences.
Sort of. Kammerer suggested a force working against entropy, the tendency towards disorder, by bringing like and like together. Think of those clusters of events that feel too meaningful to be just random chance. While Watson acknowledges it's illogical and lacks conventional proof, it points towards a discernible organization of events in the universe, a harmony beneath the chaos.
So the overarching idea is resonance within cosmic harmony.
That's how Watson pulls it together. Superimposed on the cosmic chaos are rhythms and harmonies that control many aspects of life on Earth by a communication of energy made possible by the shape of things here and their resonance and sympathy with cosmic themes. It's a profound vision of interconnectedness. But the next question is, how do our own senses fit into this? How do we perceive this resonant universe?
Right. So what does this all mean for us individually? If the cosmos is humming with all this information, how do our bodies, our brains, actually pick it up? Let's unpack the limits of our normal senses and then explore some pretty extraordinary ways we might be sensing more than we consciously realize.
Well, first, Watson points out that our sense organs, eyes, ears, nose, etc., act like narrow slits. They have to. They protect us from being totally overwhelmed by the constant bombardment of electromagnetic waves, sound waves, everything. They filter the incoming flood into what's useful and what's just background noise.
Filtering is key.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He gives the example of a cat hearing a continuous electronic click. After a while, its auditory nerve just stops sending the signal to the brain. It's filtered out as irrelevant noise until the click stops. Then the cat immediately notices the change. The change is information. Same with sailors. They might sleep soundly through the engine's roar, but wake instantly if the pitch changes or it stops.
Because the change signifies something potentially important.
Exactly. And the nature of sensation itself is fascinating. All the external info, light, sound, chemicals, gets converted into electrical impulses before the brain interprets it.
Right, it's all electricity in the brain.
Which leads to a startling thought experiment Watson uses. If you could somehow connect a nerve from your tongue to the part of your brain that processes sound, what would tasting vinegar be like?
Sure.
He suggests it would be like a startling explosion. It highlights that the quality of a sensation depends entirely on which part of the brain gets stimulated, not necessarily the original stimulus itself. Hallucinations, then, could be like short-circuit signals hitting the wrong process in the center, seeing music as light patterns, for example.
Okay, so our brain interprets electrical signals. How does this relate to external frequencies affecting us?
This leads us to Gray Walter's work on the flicker effect back in the 40s. He flashed lights into people's eyes at regular intervals and watched their brain waves on an EEG.
What did he see?
New, strange patterns emerged on the brain graphs. And critically, certain frequencies, especially those matching the brain's natural alpha rhythm, that calm, relaxed 812 cycles per second range, could actually trigger epileptic fits in people prone to epilepsy.
Wow, so the external frequency could hijack the brain's rhythm.
It seemed to drive it, yes. It actually became a useful clinical tool for diagnosis. But here's the surprising part. It wasn't just epileptics who reacted.
Yeah.
About 1 in 20 otherwise normal people also responded physically to specific flicker frequencies. They experienced strange feelings, faintness, dizziness, brief unconsciousness, muscle jerks.
Just from flashing lights?
Yes. And if they set up a feedback loop where the person's own brain signals triggered the light flash, it caused immediate seizures in over half the people tested. It shows how susceptible the brain can be to rhythmic external stimuli.
That makes you wonder about modern life. All the flickering screens, fluorescent lights.
Exactly. Fluorescent lights flicker at 120 times per second. Too fast for seizures, probably. But Watson asks, what subtle cumulative effects might they have on people exposed for hours every day? Fatigue, irritability? We don't really know.
And it's not just light, right? Sound frequencies, too.
Yes, infrasound. Frequencies below human hearing, around 10-20 cycles per second.
Sure.
The British Acoustical Society worried about infrasound produced by cars driving at steady speeds.
What effects could it have?
Things like recklessness, euphoria, lurid efficiency, dizziness, loss of balance. They suspected it might be responsible for some unexplained driving accidents, drivers just sort of wandering off course.
Because they're being subtly affected by vibrations they can't even hear?
Potentially. And interestingly, these low frequencies are also the ones that just generally make people feel disturbed or ill. Watson thinks this might explain the wild, unreasoning fear that often accompanies earthquakes, even small ones.
The fear isn't just from the shaking.
He suspects not entirely. He describes his own experience in Crete during a minor quake, being perfectly safe outside but feeling this deep, irrational terror that stopped him sleeping indoors for a week. He blames the infrasound generated by the Earth shifting, resonating with something primal in our brains.
Okay, beyond these subtle influences on our normal senses, what about seeing without eyes? Eyeless sight.
This is where it gets really extraordinary. The ability some people seem to have to perceive things like color or text using their skin. It completely blurs the lines between senses.
Are there documented cases?
Yes. Watson mentions a girl in Virginia in 1960, examined by doctors who could distinguish colors and read large print even when her eyes were completely covered with bandages and tape.
How is that possible?
It's a huge mystery. But the most famous case, certified by the Soviet Academy of Science, was Rosa Kuleshova. She could apparently see with her fingers,
What could she do?
differentiate primary colors blindfolded, even if the cards were heated or cooled to mask any temperature difference, read newsprint and sheet music under glass, identify light patches on her palm or an oscilloscope screen.
Just with her fingertips?
Even more incredibly, she could reportedly read newspaper print with her elbow while scientists were literally pressing on her eyeballs to ensure she wasn't somehow peeking. Watson quotes a researcher saying, "Nobody can cheat under this pressure." It suggests a genuine, non-visual sensory perception.
Could other people learn this?
Surprisingly, yes, to some degree. Surveys found about 1 in 6 people could learn to recognize at least 2 colors with their skin after just an hour of training.
Really? What did colors feel like?
The students described textures. Yellow felt slippery, red was sticky, green was sticky and rough, blue was smoother and harder, violet had a breaking effect on their fingers. It's bizarre, but suggests a consistent, tactile-like perception of color frequencies through the skin.
This connects back to resonance, maybe, and how colors affect us physiologically.
It seems plausible. We know colors aren't just psychological associations. Blue, calm, red, anger. They have direct physical effects. Red light demonstrably increases respiration, heartbeat, blood pressure. It's physiologically stimulating. Pure blue is calming.
So when we say a color suits someone,
Watson suggests maybe it's resonance at work. The wavelength of the color and the frequency of the person's field are in sympathy when we find their combined effect harmonious,
it's like tuning.
like the chameleon blending in.
Exactly. How does a chameleon match its background so perfectly, sometimes even backgrounds it can't fully see? Watson suggests its life field picks up the dominant frequency of the environment and resonates, translating that into the appropriate skin color, a direct, unconscious harmony. Wow. And speaking of strange resonance, those check generators, Pavlida.
Ah, Robert Pavlida and his metal generators.
Yeah.
These were small, strangely shaped metal objects. He claimed he could store his own biological energy in them.
Store energy. And do what with it?
He could apparently make a small fan blade stop and even reverse direction just by staring intently at one of these generators, even when the fan was sealed in a metal box.
What caused it? Static. Magnetism.
Experiments ruled all that out. Static, air currents, heat, magnetism, it just worked. The conclusion was that these specific shapes somehow stored and focused energy from Pavlida himself, allowing a mind-over-matter effect mediated by the object. Very strange.
Okay, from fields influencing objects, what about fields influencing us? Body language, hidden cues.
Right. We're constantly sending and receiving subtle signals, often unconsciously. The classic example is Clever Hans, the horse that seemed to do math.
He wasn't actually doing math, was he?
No, he was just incredibly good at reading the tiny, involuntary cues, head movements, shifts in posture from the humans who knew the answers. It shows how sensitive animals are to our slight manifestations of mood.
And humans do this too, even with language.
Absolutely. We have complex language, but conveying deep feelings verbally can still be hard. Think about phone calls. It's easier to misunderstand or even lie without seeing the nonverbal cues. Deaf people communicate incredibly rich information purely through gesture. The whole field of kinesics, or body language, studies this unspoken dialogue.
And personal space is part of this, that invisible bubble.
Definitely. We all have one, and we defend it instinctively. Research by Kinzel on prisoners found that those with a history of violence had a much larger personal space bubble, especially behind them. Intrusion caused measurable tension and hostility. It's a real defended territory.
This connects to traditional ways of reading people, doesn't it? Like palmistry.
Watson discusses these. Palmistry, or chirology, is based on the idea that our internal state is mirrored externally in our palms, which are packed with nerve endings connected to the brain. Palmists claim they can spot signs of organic diseases, thyroid, spinal, liver issues, sometimes even predicting things like TB or cancer before symptoms show up.
Is there any basis for the lines themselves?
Anatomists say they're just creases for folding the hand, but Watson suggests there seems to be some other principle governing their precise shapes and how they constantly change. He mentions a documented case of a house painter whose palm patterns altered dramatically after a severe concussion, hinting at a deeper connection to our physical and neurological state.
What about handwriting? Graphology?
Another ancient practice dating back to at least 1622 with Camilla Baldo's book. Graphologists analyze handwriting to assess character, personality, even mental state. They claim they can distinguish genuine mental imbalance from normal aging, for instance. Emotional or physical disorders often cause a general disruption of handwriting patterns that's hard to fake.
What do they look for?
Everything. Slant, pressure, margins, spacing, rhythm, clarity, punctuation, how loops are formed. Repetition of traits is key. And signatures are seen as particularly unique and revealing, like a personal fingerprint. And finally, physiognomy, judging by facial features and body shape. Right. There seem to be human norms, like the classic Greek harmonious proportions, height 6 times foot length, etc. Deviations often have biological reasons. William Sheldon's somatotyping in the 1940s identified body shape tendencies: endomorph, rounded; mesomorph, muscular; ectomorph, lean, angular; We're all a mix.
Does body shape correlate with personality or intelligence?
Not with intelligence, research suggests. But certain temperaments are often associated with shapes. Endomorphs seen as relaxed, mesomorphs as energetic, ectomorphs as thoughtful or inhibited, and our faces definitely reflect internal states.
Like how?
Genuine pleasure causes relaxation around the eyes, and a slight puffiness in the lower eyelid, something you can't really fake convincingly. Physiognomists link rounded faces with good humor, muscular faces with energy, slender faces with imagination. And of course, medical conditions like hyperthyroidism can visibly alter features, like causing bulging eyes. Our bodies are canvases reflecting our inner world. It really is astonishing how much we communicate, consciously or not, through our bodies and expressions. But now, what about the even deeper connections? The ones that seem to stretch beyond the physical into altered states of consciousness, maybe even beyond the dimensions we normally experience.
Exactly. Here's where it gets, well, truly mind-bending. If our brains are so tuned into subtle frequencies and information, what happens when we deliberately shift our consciousness? Or when our minds seem to act outside their physical confines? This final part of Supernature really pushes the envelope.
Watson starts with transcendence through the brain's power over the body. Things like hypnosis and autosuggestion. He even brings up animal immobilization, the experimentum mirabili.
What's that?
Simple techniques like turning a toad on its back or a crayfish on its head makes them go rigid, immobile. Holding a hair upside down induces wax-like pliability. A snake charmer's specific grip immobilizes a cobra. Zoos use similar methods. It seems constraint, maybe focusing attention or altering sensory input, plays a key role, like swaddling clothes calming a baby.
And this relates to pain tolerance.
Yes, we know anxiety makes pain worse, but if your attention is completely fixed elsewhere, say, in intense concentration or during an emergency, you might not even notice a significant injury until later. It shows the mind's power to gatekeep sensation.
Hypnosis takes us even further, right?
Dramatically so. Stephen Black did experiments where hypnotized subjects were told they couldn't hear a specific loud tone, and they didn't react physiologically, no startle response. They couldn't even feel the vibration of a tuning fork of that frequency on their ankle.
The brain just turned off the perception.
It seems so, a negative hallucination. In one case, a subject's brain literally stopped reacting normally to a bright light shown in their eyes after hypnotic suggestion. They could also induce positive hallucinations, seeing vivid colors that weren't there, complete with realistic afterimages. Watson's conclusion. There seems to be almost no limit to the things that we can make our body do if we put our mind to it.
How does this relate to consciousness itself?
The brain starts as a blank sheet, building a complex theoretical model of the world from all its experiences. This internal model allows it to generate its own reality, to think for itself, even without normal external input. Think of dreaming or intense meditation.
Like the Tibetan monks practicing tumo.
Exactly. A stunning example of autosuggestion and mind-body control. They train to combat extreme cold at high altitudes through breathing exercises and meditation, focusing on internal fires. They bathe in icy streams, sit naked in the snow.
And the test is drawing a wet sheet on their body.
Yes, wrapped around them on a freezing, windy night, using only their internally generated heat. It's an incredible demonstration of the mind's ability to command physiology.
Wow. What about sleep and dreams? We spend so much time doing it.
A third of our lives. And it's still deeply mysterious, but Watson sees it as crucial for higher awareness. Physiologically, lots happens. Eyelids close, pupils constrict, secretions slow down, breathing and heart rate change, brain waves shift from active beta down to slow delta waves.
But then there's REM sleep.
Right, paradoxical sleep or rapid eye movement, closely linked to dreaming. Interestingly, it's present throughout life in what Watson calls more inventive and aware. Animals, cats, raccoons, monkeys, but in less intelligent animals like sheep or cows, it's mainly seen only when they're very young.
So REM sleep correlates with intelligence or consciousness level.
There seems to be a direct correlation. Watson suggests an evolutionary gradation of awareness, with humans taking an extra step leading to a new kind of awareness, perhaps accessed or cultivated during these dreaming states.
How do drugs fit into these altered states?
They interact with these brain systems. Stimulants like amphetamines or caffeine mimic the brain's own wakefulness systems. Sedatives like barbiturates induce only non-dreaming sleep, often causing a REM rebound afterwards, like the brain catching up on lost dreams. Opiates induce some dream sleep, but also delirium, euphoria, pain relief acting like strong hypnosis or autosuggestion.
And hallucinogens.
Watson says they illuminate the fringes of an expansive mind and experience so vast that it is difficult to comprehend. He quotes Sidney Cohen, who called the brain an underpowered, self-scrutinizing symbol factory, whose capacities for wonder and self-awareness are actually quite unnecessary for purposes of physical survival. Watson agrees. The extent of man's potential is awe-inspiring. These states hint at a much larger mental landscape.
Okay, pushing boundaries further still. Telepathy. Direct mind-to-mind communication.
Rhine's card-guessing experiments were foundational here. Using the Zener cards, star, circle, square, cross, waves, some subjects scored astronomically against chance odds of millions to one, like the 9-year-old girl who got 23, then 25 right when emotionally connected to the experimenter. Or Hubert Pierce's perfect score.
But the effect wasn't always that strong.
No. Over millions of trials, the overall effect was small, but persistently there. A bias beyond chance. Transmitting detailed information quickly seems hard. The brain signals involved apparently blur and disappear with conscious effort.
Were there other convincing experiments?
Soule and Shackleton in London, 1936-1943. Using colored animal cards, Basil Shackleton achieved results with odds so high against chance they were almost meaningless. Watson notes Shackleton's firm belief in his own abilities seemed key.
And the Soviet research with brainwaves.
Kamensky and Nikolaev in 1967. This was hailed as the first time in history for visible proof. Kamensky in Moscow sent a mental signal. Nikolaev in Leningrad, 400 miles away, showed drastic changes in his alpha brain rhythm just 3 seconds later. Activity even showed up in his temporal lobe, usually for sound processing, like he heard the thought.
So telepathy seems linked to specific brain states, alpha waves.
It seems so. Both PK, linked to theta waves, and telepathy, linked to alpha 812 cyclosec, appear to happen under specific psychological conditions. Subjects describe the state needed as intense focus on nothingness, concentrated passivity, or relaxed attentiveness, that calm, receptive, yet focused state.
Are there physiological correlates too?
Yes. Reports of perfect synchronization and pulse between sender and receiver during successful telepathy. Also, increased electrical activity and decreased skin resistance, a sign of arousal or connection at the moment of contact. Physical relaxation seems absolutely essential. Yogis in deep meditation show almost zero muscle electrical activity.
How does relaxation help?
It triggers a chain reaction. Less muscle activity means more CO2 in the lungs, which means less oxygenated blood goes to the brain initially. The brain then compensates by increasing blood flow, which happens to produce those fast alpha rhythms associated with telepathy.
Which makes you wonder about high-altitude monks again.
Exactly. Could the lower oxygen levels at high altitudes naturally facilitate these states? It's an intriguing thought.
And maybe we receive telepathic info unconsciously all the time.
Watson suggests it's regularly received by the unconscious and only occasionally breaks through to conscious levels. Dreams, hunches, sudden insights. Maybe these are ways unconscious telepathic information surfaces. He even speculates that many of our everyday thoughts are telepathic, or at least partly telepathic in origin. We just don't recognize it.
Could this have evolutionary implications? Sir Alistair Hardy thought so.
Yes. Hardy proposed telepathy could be a subtle factor shaping species behavior, a kind of non-conscious group behavior plan linking individuals. If one bird develops a new feeding habit, maybe that knowledge spreads telepathically, encouraging others to try it, eventually leading to evolutionary changes like longer bills through natural selection favoring the behavior.
Like the blue tits learning to open milk bottles.
That's a classic example.
Yeah.
How did that behavior spread so rapidly across Europe? Maybe partly through observation, but perhaps also a subtle telepathic sharing of the successful strategy driving organic selection.
And ants.
Ants forming a defensive phalanx almost instantly after a disaster seemingly too fast for normal chemical or touch signals. It strongly suggests some kind of rapid telecommunication system, possibly telepathic, coordinating the entire colony.
Okay, if minds can connect across space, can they connect across time? Precognition, knowing the future.
Watson approaches this carefully. He starts by noting that even a simple conditioned reflex, Pavlov's dog salivating at a bell, is a kind of travel in time, using past associations to predict a future event, food. Animals learn to anticipate based on patterns.
But humans face much more uncertainty.
We do, and we respond with systems of prophecy or divination. And Watson notes, surprisingly, some of them work, or at least seem to, often enough to have survival value in cultures dependent on anticipating events. Information reduces anxiety.
Knowing is better than not knowing, even if the news is bad.
Experiments suggest so. Rats prefer paths where they get advance info about food, even if the reward amount is the same. Humans, too, prisoners facing possible parole, experience more stress than those resigned to a life sentence. Uncertainty is often harder to bear than a known negative outcome. That old saying, no news is good news, Watson thinks is deeply inaccurate. We crave information about what's coming.
What about divination systems like the I Ching?
He discusses the I Ching, the ancient Chinese book of changes, using yarrow stalks or coins to generate hexagrams, which are then interpreted. The process has elements of chance, but also structure. If all stocks coins point the same way, it has special significance. But interpretation is key.
Jung was fascinated by the I Ching, wasn't he? Synchronicity.
Yes, Jung noted its uncanny inner consistency and linked it to his ideas about meaningful coincidence, synchronicity, and the unconscious. Watson adds another layer, suggesting that the power of psychokinesis has a great deal to do with the weird accuracy of the I Ching. Maybe the user subtly influences the random fall of the coins or stocks to reflect their inner state or question.
Did Watson use it himself?
He did, and describes developing a personal relationship with it, like a wise, gentle, stern friend. He felt it didn't give new information, but helped restore circulation to parts of the mind, bringing existing, perhaps unconscious knowledge to the surface through its archetypal patterns.
Okay, from ancient divination to modern technology. What about the voices of the dead, electronic voice phenomena?
This is definitely one of the most controversial areas Watson touches on. Konstantin Radiv, a Latvian psychologist, reported discovering soft, extraneous voices on audio tape recordings.
How did he record them?
Several ways. Sometimes just speaking into a microphone and finding extra voices on playback. Other times, recording static or white noise from a radio between stations, or using a simple crystal diode receiver.
What were the voices like?
Radiv described them as speaking with a strange rhythm, often softly, in multiple languages, sometimes mixed within a sentence. Their grammar apparently followed rules different from normal speech. And crucially, they sometimes seemed to respond directly to questions posed during the recording sessions.
Responded, like a conversation.
That was the claim. Radiv recorded over 70,000 such voice snippets. Voice print analysis confirmed the presence of voice-like sounds distinct from the researchers. Watson states, there can be no doubt about the reality of the sounds they are on the tapes. The huge question is, what are they?
What did Radiv believe?
He became convinced they were the voices of the deceased. He confidently identifies some of them as Goethe, Mayakovsky, Hitler, and his own mother. He believed he was communicating with friends who had passed through the transition of death.
Has anyone explained it normally? Interference? Stray broadcasts?
Watson notes that despite the controversy, rigidly controlled experiments have been unable to account for the presence of the voices by any normal method. It remains a deeply unsettling, unexplained phenomenon.
Wow. Okay, one last unsettling area. Witchcraft, black magic, re-examined scientifically.
Watson connects this to telepathic transmission of emotion. He cites experiments by Milan Ryzel, a Czechoslovakian physician. Ryzel had senders concentrate intensely on specific emotions and tried to transmit them telepathically.
What happened?
In one case, the sender focused on the anxiety of suffocation, recalling asthma attacks. The receiver, miles away, suddenly suffered an intense choking fit, experiencing the physical symptoms.
What?
Another time, the sender took a depressant drug and focused on gloomy, depressive feelings. The receiver showed corresponding changes in their EEG, developed strong headaches, and felt nauseous for hours.
So emotions could be transmitted telepathically and cause physical effects.
That's the frightening implication. It puts a new spin on black magic. It's not just about someone believing they're cursed and making themselves ill, which can happen. Russell's work suggests, as Watson puts it, you don't necessarily have to think your own destructive thoughts. Someone else can think them up and point them at you. A much darker potential for telepathic influence.
Goodness. This whole exploration, it really does blur the lines, doesn't it, between normal and supernatural, mind and matter, self and universe. It suggests everything is far more connected and responsive than we usually think. So wrapping this all up, what are the final takeaways from this incredible deep dive in Supernature?
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? We've gone from Earth's subtle daily rhythms and the moon's surprising pull on our biology
to our own personal energy fields, the possibility of mind influencing matter with PK, the strange reality of seeing without eyes.
The mysteries of telepathy, perhaps even across time with precognition, and those deeply unsettling voice phenomena and emotional transmissions. Watson's central message really shines through. Life survives in the chaos of the cosmos by picking order out of the winds. by resonating with the underlying patterns.
Yeah, that interconnectedness is the key theme. Nothing happens in isolation. He says, we breathe and bleed, we laugh and cry, we crash and die in time with cosmic cues. Whether it's a fruit fly emerging, a worm breeding by moonlight, or even human conception potentially linked to lunar phases, it's all part of a cosmic dance.
A universe far more subtle, responsive, and, well, alive with information than our everyday senses usually let on.
And Watson leaves us with this really powerful, almost visionary thought about human potential. It really stuck with me. He says, I'm impressed by our inefficiency, by our vast, as yet untapped potential, and by the progress we have already made using only one small corner of our minds.
We're just scratching the surface.
Right. He continues, we are indeed larvae, eating our way through Earth's resources in a mindless caterpillar fashion, but I believe that the imago is already beginning to stir within.
The imago, the
Yeah.
butterfly waiting inside the caterpillar.
Exactly. When the climate is right, he finishes, it will break out not as some sort of supercomputer, but as an organic being that will embody all of supernature and look back on technology as a childhood toy.
Wow, that's a profound image. Technology is a toy compared to our innate potential to embody supernature itself.
So the final question really is for you, the listener. What does all this mean for you? Maybe the real deep dive isn't just into Watson's book or these fascinating ideas, but into hidden capabilities lying dormant within ourselves and the subtle connections weaving through the universe all around us.
What incredible potential might be waiting to stir within your own imago if you start listening, start tuning into the hidden rhythms of supernature?